Hello and welcome back to Round the Table, the slow TV radio podcast from the meeting point for students of English not only in Bilbao but throughout the world. So the final week of the trimester, we were discussing the topic of originality. Originality in music, in fashion, and if artistic people are just trying too hard to be original and not really focusing on the talent as maybe they should be. And without further ado, let's look at an interesting word. So why is this called a podcast and not a postcard? A lot of people seem to think this is a postcard. Well, it's not. It's a podcast. But let's go back to the origins of postcards. Post is like a pillar. Could be made of wood, could be made of stone. But they are often used to mark a position, especially a position along a road. So the post then became a fixed point along a journey. So then a post became the position and often a relay station. This is why we have an outpost, meaning a position. And you can also have a post in a job, which is a position as well. And we can also use post as a verb to send somebody, especially somebody in the military, can be posted abroad. They are sent to another country. They are posted. So this post means position. And then as these posts were markers and positions along a journey, they were often places where messages were exchanged. And this is how we get a connection with posting a letter. So the bags of mail and all the correspondence and parcels and things like that would assemble at a certain place to be picked up by the transportation system. Often they were coaches or someone on a horse would arrange to collect mail at a certain place. So this is why we have a postal system. Then, shortly before 1900, somebody invented the postcard. People used to send letters and parcels, and then they invented a system of just making a little card. Originally they were blank, and you just wrote a message, and then they decided to put photographs on one side, and it became incredibly popular. There was a golden age of postcards, apparently, between about 1880 and 1920, something like that. And that was incredibly popular. Now let's look at this word broadcast. Broad means wide. Cast means to throw. Casting is a throwing verb. Originally, broadcasting was throwing seeds before the machinery for farming was invented back in medieval times. You would broadcast the seeds. And then when the radio was invented, they used the same term. As we've been discussing quite a lot recently about the invention of new words, and very few words are actually new. They're normally old words that are recycled to cover the new technology or new developments. So the word broadcast existed long before radios and televisions were invented. So this is why we can also disseminate information. We use that verb disseminate, which is the same thing. That semin bit in the middle is to do with the seeds. So broadcasting then, by the time radio was invented, nobody was broadcasting seeds anymore, so the meaning completely changed. Now we want to look at the word pod. This here is a pea pod. A pod is the container, a capsule, as it were. So in nature, you get beans and peas, they grow in a pod. So a pod is a container. And then the iPod was invented, and that was called the iPod because it was a receptacle, a capsule containing thousands of songs. And then when people started broadcasting programs on the internet, which were designed for you to listen to on your iPod, they put the words together and we came to the podcast. So pod is a mixture of the P-pod and the broadcast. So that is why this is a podcast and it's not a postcard. Now let's look at some of the interesting phrases that came up in this week's conversations. Keep a low profile. This is another way of saying avoid being conspicuous. We were talking about whether it's best to blend in or stand out. So to keep a low profile is not to be noticed. There's nothing new under the sun. I think that's self-explanatory. That just means there's nothing new, but people like to add under the sun at the end. Now this next one, this is actually quite bad English. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That means if it isn't broken. This is a colloquial phrase and it's not in the best form of English that I should be teaching you really, but that's the way people say it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is often used when people like to change things just for the sake of changing them when it's not really necessary, and it's sometimes better to leave things alone as they are because they function perfectly well without your interference. Now we have a group of sayings here that are all referring to being very precise. The first one, spot on. That might be if somebody says something and they say it in exactly the right way. Or you could use this expression when you are, imagine you're, putting a cupboard into a space and it fits exactly into the space available. And you say spot on. Or if you're putting something up on the wall like a shelf and then you check that it's level and it's perfectly level, you say spot on. Means you've done it precisely, accurately, perfectly. On the dot is very similar, but this refers to at a very precise time. So if the class starts at 6 o'clock, and as you walk in, you hear the chimes on the cathedral ringing the hour of 6. You have arrived on the dot. Hit the nail on the head is another very accurate one, but this is referring usually to when someone describes something in a very precise way, or they've found a perfect explanation for something, but it's normally using exactly the correct words. Often when you're having troubles explaining things and then somebody else explains it in a very clear, concise way, you say, you hit the nail on the head. On the spur of the moment. A little while ago we were talking about spurs. So spur is that spike sharp thing on the back of your boot when you're riding a horse. So you stick it in the horse to make the horse go faster. So usually to spur something on is to motivate it. So this is referring to doing something on impulse, on the spur of the moment. You did it without any planning. Blown out of all proportion, or blown out of proportion. I think we've had this one recently. It means grossly exaggerated. And in the explanation there's a good collocation, grossly exaggerated. Now we've got a couple here which mean to go to the beginning. So to start from scratch. means to start with nothing, from zero, to start from scratch. Go back to square one is slightly different. This is to return to the beginning. This obviously comes from playing board games, when you have to go back to the beginning. So they're both from the beginning, but one is with starting from nothing and the second one is going back to the beginning. To have the final say. This was in a discussion about whether artificial intelligence can make medical decisions. So doctors now use artificial intelligence, but the doctor will have the final say. To be at the centre of attention for people who like to be noticed, they like to be popular, they like people talking about them. To put yourself in somebody else's shoes, to see the world from the position of another person. Touch and go. I think this is related to sport. It was touch and go. It very nearly didn't happen, or something was very close to happening. So you could say there was a terrible accident and it was touch and go whether he would survive. Or it was touch and go whether the plane would land safely. So when something is touch and go, you're not sure what will happen, so it could go really well, it could go really badly. Touch and go. The next two are just a question of the dependent verbs here. So it's tell the difference, not say the difference. Pay attention, not put attention. Tell the difference, pay attention. And finally, this strange structure here. Much to my surprise means I was very surprised when this happened. Much to my surprise, he passed the exam. Or you can have much to the annoyance of my father, the Conservatives were elected, or something like that. So much to my surprise, much to his annoyance, those kind of phrases beginning with much to. I thought that was a strange kind of structure. Anyway, those are some of the phrases from this week's conversations. And now we managed to get enough jet fuel together to fly him all the way in from California with a very interesting monologue on the subject of originality. It's your favourite foreign correspondent, celebrity guest speaker.
Originality is often seen as a rare quality, something that sets individuals apart. Yet, what feels original today can quickly become familiar tomorrow. In fashion, for example, styles once considered outrageous, like tattoos, unusual clothing, or strange hairstyles, gradually enter the mainstream. What shocks one generation often becomes ordinary for the next. Society often has a complicated relationship with originality. On the one hand, people tend to value conformity, preferring what feels familiar and safe. On the other hand, progress depends on innovation. New ideas are often resisted at first, but later embraced once they prove useful or appealing. Across all creative fields, originality often comes from reworking what already exists. Writers, musicians, and artists draw on a wide range of influences, combining ideas from different sources to produce something that feels new. However, this process is not without its risks. It can raise concerns about cultural appropriation, particularly when elements of one culture are used without proper understanding or respect. In the arts, especially music, innovation is also driven by new technologies. Many groundbreaking works have only been possible because new tools allow artists to experiment in ways that were previously impossible. Even so, these innovations do not emerge in isolation. They still build on earlier ideas, showing that creativity is as much about development and transformation as it is about invention. Artificial intelligence raises further questions about originality. Machines can now generate music, images, and texts that resemble human creations. This challenges traditional ideas about authorship and creativity. If an AI produces something new by learning from existing works, who owns the result? And can it truly be considered original? Ultimately, originality may be less about creating something entirely new and more about rearranging what already exists. Every idea has roots in earlier thoughts, traditions, or inventions. From this perspective, originality becomes relative, and perhaps in the end, nothing is completely new.
And that's about it for this week, ladies and gentlemen. As we're on holiday, we won't have a topic for next week, so I'll have to cut this one a bit short to be sure to have more material for another programme next Sunday. So join us again. We'll have a little bit of pronunciation, maybe some interesting phrases, maybe a joke or two. I won't see you at the meeting point this week, so have a good week. Till next week.